This is a pound of caulking, of cotton caulking that I've purchased, and it comes wrapped in paper like this, and I've just broken it open, and I'm going to roll it out in a special way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it up in a ball like this, just like rolling yarn, I guess, like your mom would roll yarn. This enables me to put it inside a bucket, and I'm going to have 2 or 3 of them down inside the bucket, and I'm going to feed them out of the bucket hanging around my neck into the seam. Well, that just happens that it ended right there, and that's fine with me. So there's one in the bucket, and you can see I've got others in the bucket, and I've got my tools in there that I'm going to be using. Let's get started. What I've got is the bucket hanging around my neck, because you can see the wind's blowing. If this was much longer than this, the wind would be flapping it all over the place and start pulling it in half, and I'd have a hard time keeping that nice, neat shape that's necessary in order for me to make it neat as it goes in. Now I've started it in the seam here. Trying to make it as organized and neat as possible to make each loop the same size and length. So I'm gathering the same amount up. I'm pulling it up with my iron, scraping the paint job until I feel the seam. Tap it once and again. You try to make everything you do like this rhythmic if you can, because rhythmic allows you to be able to coordinate one hand with the other. You know, the rhythm is like coordinating 2 people. Well, it helps me coordinate my left hand with my right hand if I can keep a rhythm going. Takes 2 little taps, one to make sure it's in the seam without damaging the seam, and one to set it back far enough so you can pull your iron out without pulling the cotton out with the iron. This is my making iron right here. It's a little bit wider. Rhythmic. Like I said, I'm not putting the iron on top of the cotton out here and trying to push it in. The cotton would be alongside the iron on both sides. It'd make a mess of the seams. I could miss the seams. What I'm doing is I've got the iron behind the cotton. I sneak up on it a little bit. You can see it sucking the cotton down in front of the iron. The part that the iron's not even touching. You suck it into the slot. Maybe I can make a tune. So you've seen a little bit of the technique that I'm using to get this cotton into the seams and then set it or make it into place. And I'm working from my right to the left. Now if the seam was very, very much wider, I would have to work from my left to the right, and I would actually be packing the loops underneath the other loops. It's a totally different technique. I can't demonstrate it on this boat here because I don't have seams like that. But now I'd like to also tell you about why it's done this way. I mean, I suppose you could just take and twist the cotton and hang it out like this and probably beat it in there, but you can't control how much cotton you're getting in. This allows you to be able to control how much cotton you're picking up in a loop, how wide the loops are apart, and all those kinds of things in order to fill the seam up properly. When it's pounded in there, it actually has, it's almost like faceted, because it's got a little bit more cotton in one spot, then a little bit of a not a void, but a little bit thinner spot, and then a little bit more cotton and a thinner spot and a little bit more. And the idea of it is it's in there in lumps. It has to be in there in lumps so that these seams up here being above the water line in this boat doesn't work very much. It's not necessarily important in this case, but in a lot of cases, when the boat wants to twist, the planks actually saw back and forth on each other like this. You see, as the boat wants to twist. They call it sawing up the cotton. So the cotton being in lumps, the lumps sink in to the cedar on both sides, and it gets a grip on the plank so that there's a resistance to the planks going back and forth this way. Obviously, there's a resistance in this manner also, but the big one you're looking for in like a big sailboat that's under tremendous stress is to stop the planks from sawing in this direction here. So over the cotton in the top sides of this boat, we're going to use an above water seam compound. It's white, made by Interlux. It kind of dries up to be somewhat elastic, and yet will sand and those kind of features, so that eventually the top side seams could be made to almost disappear using this product. So I've got some of the seam compound on a little pallet here, and I'm just squeezing it into the seams with a very flexible putty knife, because the flexible putty knife will lay down flat with pressure without you having to lay the putty knife down. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze it in there, and I'm not happy until as I squeeze it, I see it building up on the other side. That way I know it's got a hydraulic pressure, and it's all the way in the back of the seam. I'm just going to pick this up by pushing the knife. That's the way to clean it up, not by pulling the knife. Strike the seam with some seam compound, and you can see I got a little reservoir in front of the knife, and I'm going right down, and I'm applying enough pressure so that it raises up behind the knife, and you can see that little bead there on the seam right there where it raised up. That means that the seam is full. Now I don't need that bead to be there, but I want to see that bead rise up. Apply it back in the seam. Now I got a little reservoir on my knife, and I'm going to restrike the seam like that to see if that little bead doesn't rise up behind it. Now, it rose up right there, but it's a little deficient in here. So I'm just going to get a little bit more, and there it is behind it. See it raise up right behind it there? That way I know that seam has been filled all the way to the back. So it's going to take a year or so after the seam compound's been applied for it to really firm up properly, and then be able to, it'll squeeze some out into a little protrusion again, like you saw it behind the knife, and then next year it can be sanded a little bit, and then as the years go by, it can be made to look nicer and nicer and nicer.